When a grieving millionaire hears an unfinished melody in his attic, played by a housekeeper with secrets of her own, the music stirs more than just memories. But can two broken souls really compose something lasting together? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Camille Ross pulled her old station wagon into the long, winding driveway of the Dane estate. The morning sun glinted off the windows of the massive countryside home, making her squint as she parked in her usual spot behind the gardens. At 36, Camille had been cleaning houses for the wealthy for nearly a decade, but the Dane property was by far the most impressive and the most mysterious. "Another day, another dollar," she muttered to herself as she grabbed her cleaning supplies from the trunk. Martha, the head housekeeper, was waiting at the service entrance, checking her watch with a frown. "You're cutting it close, Camille. Mr. Dane is particular about schedules." Traffic was backed up on the highway, Camille explained, tucking a loose strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear. "Has anyone ever actually seen Mr. Dane? 3 months I've been working here and not even a glimpse." Martha lowered her voice. "That's how he wants it. He values his privacy. And remember, the main level is your responsibility, nothing else, especially not the attic." "The forbidden zone," Camille joked. Martha didn't smile. "Just do your job and don't ask questions. That's why you're still here when the last 3 cleaners were let go." Camille nodded and headed inside. The house was beautiful, all hardwood floors, crystal chandeliers, and expensive furniture, but it felt empty, not just unoccupied, but devoid of life. No family photos, no personal touches. It was like cleaning a museum display rather than a home. As she dusted the living room shelves, Camille hummed softly to herself, a habit her mother had passed down to her. Before bills and heartbreak had taken over her life, music had been Camille's passion. She'd played piano since she was 5, following in her mother's footsteps. But when her mother died 3 years ago after a long illness, leaving Camille with medical debts and a broken heart, the music had stopped. "Excuse me, Ms. Ross?" Camille turned to see George, the groundskeeper, standing in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but there's a storm headed our way. Martha says we're all leaving early today, Mr. Dane's orders. He doesn't want anyone stranded here overnight." Camille glanced out the window. Dark clouds were already gathering on the horizon. "I haven't finished the library yet. Leave it for tomorrow. Everyone needs to be out in 30 minutes. Camille rushed to finish what she could, but as she was putting away her supplies, she noticed a water stain on the ceiling near the grand staircase. That hadn't been there yesterday. She looked around. The house was eerily quiet. The other staff had already left. She should leave too, but that water stain bothered her. If there was a leak and it damaged anything expensive, she'd probably be blamed. "I'll just take a quick look," she told herself, climbing the stairs to the 2nd floor. The water stain seemed to be coming from somewhere above, possibly the attic. The 3rd floor hallway was dimly lit and clearly unused. At the end was a narrow staircase leading up to a door, the attic, she assumed. Against her better judgment, Camille climbed the stairs and tested the handle. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. The attic was vast and filled with dust motes dancing in the beams of light that filtered through small windows. Old furniture covered with sheets created ghostly shapes in the shadows. But what caught Camille's eye was in the center of the room, a large object covered with a faded sheet. She approached it slowly, pulled by curiosity. When she carefully lifted the corner of the sheet, her breath caught in her throat. A grand piano, beautiful despite the layer of dust covering its gleaming black surface. Without thinking, Camille pulled the sheet off completely and sat on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys as memories flooded back, her mother guiding her small hands over the piano, teaching her a simple melody as they sat side by side. "Just a few notes," she whispered to herself. "No one will know." She pressed down gently, wincing at how out of tune the piano was. But still, the notes rang out in the silent attic. Slowly, her fingers remembered the melody her mother used to hum while folding laundry, something soft, slightly melancholy and unfinished, just like the memory itself. Lost in the moment, Camille didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs. She didn't notice the door opening wider. She was only aware of the music, simple, aching, alive. When she finally stopped playing, the silence seemed heavier than before. That's when she felt it, the presence of someone watching. She turned sharply toward the door, but there was no one there, just an empty doorway and the faint sound of retreating footsteps. Her heart pounding, Camille quickly covered the piano again and hurried downstairs. The storm was picking up outside, rain beginning to lash against the windows. She gathered her things and rushed to her car, wondering if she'd just imagined someone watching her. As she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something important. What Camille didn't know was that Grayson Dane, the reclusive owner of the house, had been standing in that doorway. And for the first time in 3 years, he'd felt something other than emptiness. Grayson Dane stood at his office window, watching the storm rage outside. At 42, he was at the height of his career, CEO of Dane Designs, a luxury empire. That had made him a fortune. But success had never felt so hollow. 3 years ago, his younger brother Michael had died in a car accident. They'd argued that morning, a stupid fight about the business, and Grayson had never gotten to apologize. The guilt and grief had changed him. He'd retreated from public life, buried himself in work, and eventually moved to this isolated estate where no one could see what he'd become. A ghost living in a mausoleum of memories. The melody he'd heard in the attic earlier that day still echoed in his mind. It had been Michael's piano once. Grayson had covered it and forbidden anyone to touch it after the funeral. Yet hearing those hesitant notes had stirred something in him. A crack in the ice he'd built around himself. "Who is she?" he asked without turning around. His assistant, David, cleared his throat. "Camille Ross. Been with the cleaning service for 3 months. Excellent references. No issues until today when she went where she shouldn't have." "Fire her, if that's what you want, sir." Grayson was silent for a long moment. "No," he finally said. "Not yet." David seemed surprised but nodded. "As you wish. The revised contracts for the Milan project need your signature before tomorrow." Grayson turned back to his desk, burying himself in work until dawn, trying to forget the sound of that unfinished melody and the strange feeling it had awakened in him. The next morning, Camille arrived at work early, determined to make up for leaving things unfinished the day before. She was also nervous. Had someone seen her in the attic? Would today be her last day? Martha met her with the usual list of tasks. "Library first today. You'll need to give it extra attention since you missed it yesterday." No mention of the attic. Camille breathed a sigh of relief. The morning passed uneventfully. Camille was dusting the bookshelves in the library when she felt that same sensation, someone watching. She turned to find a tall man standing in the doorway. He was striking rather than handsome, lean with sharp features and intense grey eyes. That seemed to cut right through her. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and he wore an expensive-looking suit that did nothing to hide the tension in his shoulders. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar, though Camille was certain they'd never met. "Mr. Dane," she gasped, immediately lowering her eyes. So this was the mysterious owner of the house. "You were in the attic yesterday," he said. His voice was deep but quiet, as if he didn't use it often. There was no point denying it. "Yes, sir. I saw a water stain on the ceiling and went to check for leaks. I'm sorry for overstepping." "And the piano?" Camille's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "That was inexcusable. I understand if you want me to leave." Grayson studied her for a long moment. "What was that song?" The question caught her off guard. "Just something my mother used to hum while doing housework. It's not really a full song, just a melody. It sounded unfinished." "It is. My mother never wrote down the ending. She always said the best melodies don't have endings, just pauses." Something flashed in his eyes, recognition perhaps, or pain. "Finish your work here," he said abruptly, then turned and left. Camille stood frozen, her heart racing. She hadn't been fired on the spot, which was surprising enough. But there had been something else in that brief interaction, something she couldn't quite name. The next day, Camille arrived to find a note with her usual list of duties. Attic needs dusting, piano needs polishing, 2 p.m. Martha raised an eyebrow when she saw it. "Seems you've caught Mr. Dane's attention. Be careful with that." "What to P? You mean?" He hasn't let anyone touch that piano since his brother died. It was Michael's. At exactly 2 p.m., Camille nervously made her way to the attic. The sheet had been removed from the piano, and the windows were open, letting in fresh air and sunlight. She set to work carefully cleaning the dust from the beautiful instrument. As she polished the dark wood, she couldn't help running her fingers lightly over the keys now and then, not pressing down, just feeling their smooth coolness under her fingertips. "Why did you stop playing?" Camille jumped at the sound of Grayson's voice. He was standing in the doorway again, watching her with those intense grey eyes. "I didn't mean to." "Not today," he interrupted. "Before. You play like someone who once loved it." "Why did you stop?" Camille was stunned by the personal question. "Life got complicated," she answered simply. "After my mother died, there wasn't time for music anymore, just bills and survival." Grayson nodded slightly, as if her answer confirmed something for him. Play something. It wasn't a request. It was somewhere between an order and a plea. "I'm here to clean, Mr. Dane." "Play something," he repeated, softer this time. "Please." Camille hesitated, then sat on the bench. Her fingers trembled slightly as she began to play, not her mother's melody this time, but Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. She stumbled a few times, rusty from years without practice, but the music still flowed through her like a forgotten language suddenly remembered. When she finished, she didn't dare look up at him. "Again tomorrow," Grayson said quietly. "Same time." And then he was gone, leaving Camille alone with the piano and a growing sense that something important was happening, something that went far beyond a cleaning job at a wealthy man's estate. As she drove home that evening, Camille couldn't stop thinking about the strange encounter. Why would a powerful, reclusive man like Grayson Dane want to hear her play? And why did she feel so drawn to him, despite the obvious barriers between them? What she didn't know was that back at the estate, Grayson had opened a sketchbook for the first time in 3 years. In the soft light of his study, his hand moved across the page, drawing the first tentative lines of a woman sitting at a piano, her expression lost in music. Something was awakening in both of them, something neither had felt in a very long time. Hope. Over the next 2 weeks, Camille's routine changed dramatically. Each afternoon at 2 p.m., she would climb the stairs to the attic and play the piano for an hour, while Grayson Dane sat quietly in a chair by the window, sometimes with his eyes closed, sometimes watching her hands move across the keys. They rarely spoke during these sessions. Camille would play whatever came to mind, classical pieces she remembered, simple songs her mother had taught her, even fragments of melodies she made up on the spot. And Grayson would listen, his expression unreadable but his presence constant. The staff had started to whisper. Martha pulled Camille aside one morning with concern in her eyes. "Be careful," she warned. "Whatever's happening between you and Mr. Dane, it won't end well. Men like him don't cross those lines permanently." "Nothing's happening," Camille insisted. "I just play the piano for him, that's all." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Something was happening, something subtle but powerful. In the quiet of the attic, surrounded by dust and memories, they were connecting in a way that defied explanation. Today, as Camille finished playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, she glanced over at Grayson. He was sitting with a sketchbook on his lap, his hand moving quickly across the page. "You're drawing again," she said softly. He looked up, surprised, then closed the sketchbook. "How did you know I used to draw?" "Your hands," Camille replied. "They move like they're used to creating something. And I've seen your designs in magazines. Dane Designs is famous." Grayson set the sketchbook aside. "I haven't drawn anything worth keeping in 3 years." "Since your brother died," Camille said, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry. Martha mentioned it once. I shouldn't have." "It's all right," Grayson interrupted. "Yes, since Michael died. He was the real artist in the family. I just had a good eye for business." "That's not what the magazines say. They call you a visionary." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "They used to. Now they probably call me a recluse or a has-been." "Why did you stop?" Camille asked, turning, fully on the piano bench to face him. Grayson was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. We argued the morning he died about the business, about the direction it was taking. He wanted to keep it small, authentic. I wanted to expand, become a luxury brand. He stormed. Out, drove too fast on a rainy road? Grayson's voice trailed off. The last thing I said to him was that he was holding us back. The pain in his words hung in the air between them. Camille felt an unexpected urge to reach out to him, to offer some comfort, but she stayed where she was. I stopped drawing because it reminded me of him, Grayson continued, and because I didn't deserve to create anything beautiful after what I'd done. That's not fair to your brother's memory, Camille said gently. Would he have wanted you to stop living because he couldn't? Grayson looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Why did you really stop playing, Camille? Was it just about money and time? The direct question caught her off guard. She looked down at her hands resting on the piano keys. After my mother died, I just couldn't feel the music anymore, she admitted. She was the one who taught me to play. Every time I sat at a piano, all I could think about was how she wasn't there to listen. So I stopped. It was easier than playing for no one. Because no one was listening, Grayson said softly. Camille nodded, surprised by how well he understood. I hear you, he said, the simple words carrying a weight that made her look up at him again. Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. The clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, breaking the spell. I should get back to my regular duties, Camille said, standing up quickly. Tomorrow? Grayson asked, and there was a note of uncertainty in his voice that hadn't been there before. Yes, Camille replied. Same time. As she headed downstairs, her heart was beating faster than usual. Something had shifted between them today. The careful distance they'd maintained was beginning to close, and that both thrilled and terrified her. The next day, Camille arrived at the estate to find the staff in a flutter of activity. What's going on? She asked Jenny, one of the kitchen helpers, who was rushing past with a tray of coffee. Mr. Dane's brother-in-law is here, Jenny whispered excitedly. Richard Foster. He runs the business with Mr. Dane. Apparently there's some big crisis that needed Mr. Dane's immediate attention. Camille felt a twinge of disappointment. With important business visitors, their piano session would surely be cancelled. She went about her regular cleaning duties, trying not to think about the attic or the man who waited there each afternoon. As she was vacuuming the main hallway, voices drifted from Grayson's office, raised voices that were clearly in the middle of a heated argument. You can't keep hiding out here, Gray, a man's voice insisted. The board is getting restless. Competitors are circling. We need you back in New York. The company is doing fine without me there, Grayson replied, his voice cooler than the other. Man's. That's why I made you COO, Richard. It's not just about the business, Richard said, his tone softening slightly. It's about you. Elise is worried sick about her brother. We all are. It's been 3 years, Gray. Michael wouldn't have wanted this for you. Don't tell me what Michael would have wanted, Grayson snapped. Camille moved further down the hall, not wanting to eavesdrop any more than she already had. But as she worked, she couldn't help wondering about Grayson's life before grief had driven him into isolation. He must have been different once, more alive, less guarded. When 2 p.m. came, Camille hesitated. Should she go to the attic as usual, or would Grayson be too busy with his visitor? Finally, she decided to at least check. To her surprise, when she reached the attic, Grayson was already there, sitting at the piano himself, his fingers hovering over the keys without touching them. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said without looking up. I wasn't sure you'd be here, she replied, staying by the door. Your brother-in-law, Richard, has gone back to New York, Grayson interrupted. With nothing resolved as usual, Camille approached the piano slowly. He seems concerned about you. He's concerned about the business, Grayson corrected her. And my sister sent him to check that I hadn't completely lost my mind. He finally looked up at her. Maybe I have. Why would you think that? He gestured vaguely around the attic. Sitting up here every day, listening to a housekeeper play my dead brother's piano instead of running my company. Sounds pretty crazy. When you say it out loud, the words stung, even though Camille knew they weren't meant to hurt her. It was the first time Grayson had directly acknowledged the strangeness of their situation, the impropriety of it even. I can stop coming if it's a problem, she said stiffly. Grayson stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "That's not what I meant. I'm not good at this, Camille. At talking, at explaining myself." "You don't have to explain anything to me, Mr. Dane. I work for you. If you want me to play the piano, I'll play it. If you don't, I won't." "Grayson," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Please call me Grayson, at least up here." The request surprised her. It crossed another line in their undefined relationship. "I'm not crazy," he continued softly. "These hours listening to you play, they're the first time I've felt anything real since Michael died. The first time I've wanted to draw, to create. The first time I've felt alive." Camille didn't know how to respond to such raw honesty. Part of her wanted to run from the intensity of his gaze, from the weight of meaning in his words. But another part, a stronger part, wanted to stay. "Play with me," Grayson said suddenly, gesturing to the piano. "I'm rusty, but Michael made sure I learned the basics when we were kids." Hesitantly, Camille sat beside him on the bench. The proximity was new. She could feel the warmth of him next to her, smell the subtle scent of his cologne. "Do you know Heart and Soul?" she asked, placing her hands on the right side of the keyboard. "It's simple, good for beginners." Grayson nodded, positioning his hands on the left side. Together they began to play the simple duet, Camille guiding him gently when he stumbled over the notes. Their shoulders touched occasionally as they moved with the music, and each contact sent a strange flutter through her chest. When they finished, neither of them moved away immediately. The silence between them felt charged with possibility. "Thank you," Grayson said quietly. "For playing with you. For bringing music back into this house," he replied. "For reminding me that beauty still exists." Impulsively, Camille reached over and placed her hand on his where it rested on the piano keys. "It never left. You just stopped looking for it." For a breathless moment, they sat there, her hand on his, both of them afraid to move. Then Grayson turned his hand slowly, his fingers intertwining with hers. It wasn't a passionate gesture, more like two people steadying each other on uncertain ground. The clock chimed 3 times, but neither of them moved. "I should go," Camille finally whispered. "Stay," Grayson said, the word somewhere between a command and a plea. "Just a little longer." And so she did. While outside the attic window, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the estate grounds, and downstairs, the staff continued to whisper about the strange bond forming between the reclusive millionaire and the housekeeper who had somehow awakened something in him that everyone else had thought was lost forever. Martha was waiting for Camille the next morning, her expression grave. "The agency called," she said without preamble. "They've received a complaint about you." Camille's stomach dropped. "From Mr. Dane?" "No." Martha shook her head. "Anonymous, claiming you're behaving inappropriately with the client, taking advantage of a vulnerable man." "That's ridiculous," Camille protested. "I've done nothing wrong." "Perception matters in this business," Martha said. "The agency is sending someone to speak with Mr. Dane today. They're concerned about liability." Camille felt sick. She knew how this would look, a housekeeper spending private time with her wealthy employer. No one would believe nothing inappropriate had happened. "Maybe it's for the best," she said quietly. "I can find another job." Martha's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I don't think you've done anything wrong. But I've worked for rich families for 30 years, Camille. There's always a line that doesn't get crossed, and if it does," she shrugged, "the person on your side of that line is the one who pays the price." All morning, Camille went through her duties mechanically, dreading the moment when she would be called into Grayson's office and dismissed. By noon, she had decided that the best thing would be to leave on her own terms before she could be fired. She wrote a short note explaining her decision and left it on the piano in the attic. It was better this way, she told herself. Whatever had been developing between them could never have lasted. Martha was right. People like Grayson Dane didn't cross those lines permanently. As she was gathering her things to leave, David, Grayson's assistant, found her. "Mr. Dane wants to see you in his office," he said, his expression carefully neutral. With a heavy heart, Camille followed him. This was it. The end of whatever strange dream she'd been living in for the past few weeks. When she entered the office, Grayson was standing by the window, his back to her. A woman in a business suit sat across from his desk, a folder open in front of her. "Miss Ross," the woman said, "I'm Patricia Williams from Elite Household Services. I believe we need to discuss your position here." Camille straightened her shoulders, determined to maintain her dignity. "I understand. I was just leaving." Grayson turned around at that, his eyes finding hers. "No, you weren't." The certainty in his voice surprised her. "Mr. Dane has explained the situation to me," Patricia said, closing her folder. "He's made it clear that your musical sessions are part of your employment here, a specific service he's requested. As such, there's no violation of agency policy." "I don't understand," Camille said, looking from Patricia to Grayson in confusion. "I've also informed Ms. Williams that, should the agency have any further concerns about your role here, I'll simply hire you directly," Grayson added, "with a significant increase in salary." Patricia stood up, clearly uncomfortable. "As long as both parties are satisfied with the arrangement, the agency has no objection." "Good day, Mr. Dane, Miss Ross." After she left, Camille stared at Grayson in disbelief. "Why did you do that?" "Because I read your note," he replied, taking a folded piece of paper from his pocket, the goodbye she'd left in the attic. "And I'm not ready for you to leave." "This can't work," Camille said, though her heart was racing at his words. "You know it can't. We're from different worlds, Grayson." "Maybe that's exactly why it can work," he said, taking a step toward her. "You see me, Camille. Not the CEO, not the recluse, not the grieving brother, just me." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. She wanted desperately to believe him, but fear held her back. "What happens when you get tired of our little music sessions?" she asked. "When you've healed enough to go back to your real life?" Grayson took another step closer. "What makes you think this isn't my real life? Here now with you?" And for the first time since she'd known him, Camille saw something like hope in his eyes, a flicker of the man he might have been before grief had hollowed him out. "Stay," he said softly. "Please." Outside the office window, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising another storm. But inside, in the space between them, something else was gathering, something fragile but powerful, something that felt a lot like a beginning. A month passed, and summer faded into early autumn. The trees surrounding the Dane estate began to show hints of gold and crimson. Inside, the atmosphere had changed too. The house felt less like a museum and more like a home, filled with music that drifted down from the attic each afternoon. Camille had stayed, despite her misgivings. Her role had evolved into something difficult to define, part housekeeper, part pianist, part something else she wasn't ready to name. The staff had grown accustomed to her special status, though Martha still watched her with concerned eyes. Today, as Camille played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, she noticed Grayson was more distracted than usual. He sat by the window, sketchbook open, but his pencil wasn't moving. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her fingers stilling on the keys. Grayson looked up, as if startled from deep thought. "I have to go to New York tomorrow, board meeting. Can't put it off any longer." "Oh?" Camille tried to hide her disappointment. "How long will you be gone?" 3 days, maybe 4. He closed his sketchbook. Would you consider coming with me?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. This wasn't about playing the piano anymore. This was about crossing another line. "As what?" Camille asked quietly. Grayson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "I don't know. As yourself. As the person who makes me feel like I can face that boardroom again. I can't just leave my responsibilities here," she said, though her heart was racing at the thought. "Martha can manage without you for a few days. I'll double her pay." "That's not the point, Grayson." Camille stood up from the piano bench. "What you're asking, it changes things." He stood too, moving toward her with an intensity in his eyes that both thrilled and frightened her. "Things have already changed, Camille. You know that as well as I do." She did know. Every day the careful boundaries between them had blurred a little more. Their shared music had become a language, a way of speaking without words about things. Neither of them was ready to say aloud, I can't go to New York with you, she said finally. Not like this, not without knowing what this is. This? Grayson gestured between them. I don't have a name for it either. I just know that when I'm with you, I remember who I used to be, who I could be again. That's not enough, Camille replied, her voice gentle but firm. I've spent 3 years rebuilding my life after losing my mother. I can't risk everything for something that might just be healing for you. Pain flashed across Grayson's face. Is that what you think this is? Therapy? I don't know what this is, she admitted. That's the problem. The clock chimed 3 times, but unlike their usual sessions, the sound felt like an ending rather than just a pause. I should go, Camille said, moving toward the door. Grayson didn't try to stop her. I'll be back on Friday, he said as she reached the doorway. The piano will be waiting. She glanced back at him, standing alone by the window with the late afternoon sun casting shadows across his face. So will I, she promised softly. The house felt empty without Grayson. Camille went about her duties mechanically, finding herself glancing at the clock as 2 p.m. approached each day, even though she knew the attic would be silent. On Thursday afternoon, as she was dusting the library, David appeared in the doorway. Package for you, he said, holding out a small, carefully wrapped box. Mr. Dane arranged for it to be delivered today. Curious, Camille opened it to find a slim cell phone inside with a note. In case you change your mind. Call and I'll send the car. G. The gesture touched her deeply. He wasn't pushing, just offering a possibility. Later that night, in her small apartment across town, Camille sat at her kitchen table staring at the phone. Should she call? Part of her wanted to. The part that had been waking up again since she'd met Grayson. The part that remembered what it felt like to want something beyond just getting through each day. But another part, the cautious part that had protected her through years of disappointment, held her back. Wealthy men didn't fall in love with housekeepers, except in fairy tales and romance novels. And Camille had stopped believing in those long ago. She was still debating with herself when the phone rang in her hand, startling her. Grayson's name flashed on the screen. Hello? She answered, her voice shakier than she intended. I'm sorry if I woke you, Grayson said. I just wanted to hear your voice. The simple honesty of his words made her throat tight with emotion. You didn't wake me. I was thinking about you, actually. Good thoughts, I hope. Confused thoughts, she admitted. This is all so unexpected. For me too, Grayson said. I didn't plan any of this, Camille. When I hired a new housekeeper, I wasn't looking for... He paused. For whatever this has become. In the background, she could hear the sounds of New York traffic. She imagined him standing at a hotel window, looking out at the city lights. How is the board meeting? She asked, changing the subject to safer ground. Contentious. She could hear the tension in his voice. They want me to sell the company, take the money and walk away. Is that what you want? A month ago I might have said yes, Grayson replied, but now I'm not so sure. There was a time when I loved building this business, when it wasn't just about the money. What changed? Me, he said simply. After Michael died, I couldn't see the point anymore, but lately I've been remembering. They talked for nearly an hour, about his meetings, about the estate, about nothing and everything. It was easier somehow with the distance between them to speak openly. Play something for me, Grayson said eventually. Before I let you go. I don't have a piano here, Camille replied, looking around her modest apartment. Sing then, he suggested. I've never heard you sing. I'm not very good, she protested, embarrassed. Please, he said. And there was that note in his voice again, the one she couldn't refuse. So Camille sang softly into the phone, her mother's unfinished melody, the one she'd played that first day in the attic. She made up simple lyrics about longing and memory, about dust and sunlight, about finding someone who hears the music in your silence. When she finished, Grayson was quiet for so long that she thought the call might have dropped. Grayson, are you still there? I'm here, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That was beautiful. It's still unfinished, she said, just like before. No, he disagreed. It has an ending now. You just haven't found it yet. After they Hung up, Camille sat looking at the phone for a long time, wondering if maybe, just maybe, some fairy tales could come true after all. Grayson returned on Friday evening, later than expected. Camille had already gone home for the day, leaving the piano polished and waiting in the attic. She had placed a small vase of wildflowers beside it, a welcome home gesture that she hoped wasn't too forward. At home, she kept glancing at the phone, wondering if he would call again. When it finally rang just after 9, her heart leaped. "How was your trip?" she asked by way of greeting. "Enlightening," Grayson replied. "Can you come to the house? Now?" The urgency in his voice alarmed her. "Is something wrong?" "No," he assured her. "But I need to show you something. It can't wait until tomorrow." Curiosity overcame her hesitation. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The estate was quiet when she arrived, most of the staff gone for the night. David met her at the door and led her not to the attic, but to Grayson's private study, a room she'd cleaned but never entered when he was present. Grayson was standing by his desk, still in his travel clothes, looking tired but animated. The desk was covered with sketches and design plans. "What's all this?" Camille asked, approaching cautiously. "The future," Grayson said, his eyes bright with an excitement she hadn't seen before. "My future, maybe ours." He gestured to the plans spread out before them. "While I was in New York, I realized something. I don't want to sell the company, I want to transform it. Go back to what Michael and I originally dreamed of. Beautiful design that's accessible to everyone, not just the ultra-wealthy." Camille looked at the sketches. Furniture, designs, home goods, spaces that looked warm and inviting rather than coldly luxurious. "These are wonderful, Grayson. Because of you," he said, taking her hand. "You reminded me that beauty doesn't have to be expensive or exclusive to be meaningful, that sometimes the most profound moments happen in dusty attics, not marble boardrooms." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I didn't do anything special." "You did," he insisted. "You played as if the music mattered, not the audience. You saw value in things others had forgotten." He squeezed her hand gently. "In people others had forgotten." Camille felt tears prickling behind her eyes at his words. "What did the board say about your new plans?" A shadow crossed Grayson's face. "They hate them. Think I've lost my mind. Richard is leading the opposition. He's been after control of the company for years." "What will you do?" "Fight," Grayson said simply. "I still own controlling interest. It won't be easy, but..." He looked down at their joined hands. "I'm finding that the things most worth having rarely are." The meaning behind his words wasn't lost on Camille. This wasn't just about business anymore. "There's something else," Grayson continued, letting go of her hand to pick up a folder from his desk. "I had a lawyer draw this up in New York." He handed her the document. It was a contract of employment, not with the agency, but directly with Grayson himself. The position described was personal music coordinator, and the salary made Camille's eyes widen. "This is too much," she said, looking up at him in shock. "I can't accept this." "It's what you're worth," Grayson insisted. "More, actually. I want you to help me bring music back into my life, Camille. Not just in the attic, but everywhere. I want to host concerts at the estate, support young musicians, create spaces where people can experience the kind of healing I've found through your playing. This feels like..." Camille hesitated, searching for the right words. "Like you're trying to buy something that can't be purchased." Grayson's expression fell. "That's not my intention. I just wanted to give you security, a position worthy of your talent. My talent has been gathering dust for years," she reminded him gently, "just like that piano." "Then let's both start fresh," he said, taking the contract from her hands and setting it aside. "Forget the job offer if it makes you uncomfortable. But don't forget what's been happening between us. That's real, Camille. At least it is for me." The vulnerability in his voice moved her deeply. This powerful man who could buy and sell companies without blinking was standing before her, uncertainty written across his features, waiting for her to decide their future. "It's real for me too," she admitted quietly. "But it's also complicated. You're still my employer, Grayson. There's still a power imbalance we can't just ignore." "Then quit," he suggested, a hint of his businessman's directness returning. "Find another job if you need to, But don't walk away from this, from us, without giving it a chance." Before she could respond, the study door burst open. Richard stood there, his face flushed with anger. "So the rumors are true," he spat, looking from Grayson to Camille with disgust. "This is why you've lost your mind. A pretty face and a sad story." Grayson stepped protectively in front of Camille. "You have no right to barge in here, Richard, or to speak to her that way." "I have every right," Richard countered. "As CEO of the company you're trying to destroy, and as your brother-in-law, Elise is worried sick about you, Gray. First you hide, away here for years, then suddenly you want to throw away everything we've built because some housemaid played you a song." Camille flinched at his words, the ugly truth of how others would see their relationship laid bare. "Get out," Grayson said, his voice dangerously calm. "Before you say something you can't take back." Richard laughed bitterly. "Too late for that. The board's called an emergency meeting for Monday. We're invoking the mental incapacity clause in the company bylaws. You'll be removed as CEO by noon." "On what grounds?" Grayson demanded. "On the grounds that you've clearly lost touch with reality," Richard gestured dismissively toward Camille. Exhibit A. When Grayson took a threatening step forward, Camille placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Don't," she said softly. "It's not worth it." Richard smirked at her intervention. "Listen to your girlfriend, Gray. She seems to have at least some sense. More than you, anyway." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Monday 9 a.m. I'd say bring a lawyer, but it won't make a difference." After he left, the silence in the study was heavy with tension. Camille could feel Grayson's arm trembling with anger beneath her hand. "He can't do this," she said. "Can he?" Grayson moved away from her, running both hands through his hair in frustration. "Maybe. There is a clause. If the majority of the board believes I'm making decisions that endanger the company." He shook his head. "It was Michael's idea. Ironically, a safeguard against any one person having too much power. What will you do?" "Fight," he said again, but there was weariness in his voice now. "Though Richard's right about one thing, this isn't just about business strategy. It's about you, about how you've changed me." Camille felt a chill of fear. "I should go. I'm only making things worse by being here." "No," Grayson said firmly, moving to stand in front of her. "That's exactly what Richard wants, to make you run away, to make me doubt myself." "But what if he's right?" Camille asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her since she'd first felt herself falling for this man. "What if I'm just a distraction, a phase in your healing that you'll outgrow?" Grayson took her face gently between his hands, forcing her to look up at him. "You are not a phase, Camille Ross. You're the woman who brought music back into my life when I thought it was gone forever. The woman who makes me want to create again, to live again." The intensity in his eyes made it hard to breathe. "Grayson, I know it's too soon," he continued, his thumbs gently caressing her cheeks. "I know we've barely begun whatever this is between us. But I also know that I was dead inside until I heard you play that day in the attic. And I don't want to go back to that emptiness ever." Camille closed her eyes, overwhelmed by his words and by her own conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to pull away, to protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak that would come when he realized their worlds were too different to merge. But another part, stronger with each passing day, wanted to believe that something real and lasting could grow from these strange, beautiful moments they'd shared. "I'm scared," she whispered, opening her eyes to look up at him. "So am I," he admitted. "But I'm more afraid of losing you than of anything Richard or the board can do to me." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Grayson lowered his head until his lips were just inches from hers. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, "and I will." But Camille didn't want him to stop. Despite every rational voice in her head warning her against it, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home, and stepping off a cliff all at once. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened. All the music they'd shared, all the words unspoken, seemed to pour into that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Grayson rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Tonight. Tomorrow. For, as long as you want. What about Richard, the board meeting? We'll face it together, Grayson promised, if you'll stay. Outside the study windows, the autumn moon rose over the estate grounds, casting silver light across the gardens where Camille had once parked her old station wagon as just another member of the household staff. So much had changed since then, most of all herself. I'll stay, she said softly, making a choice that would forever alter the course of both their lives. Not as your employee, not as your therapist, but as your partner. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Grayson's smile was like the breaking of dawn after the longest night. He kissed her again, and in that moment, Camille could almost hear the final notes of her mother's unfinished melody beginning to take shape at last. Quatillo. Neither of them knew was that Richard hadn't left the estate. He stood in the shadows of the hallway, his phone in his hand, sending a text message that would set in motion events designed to tear apart the fragile happiness they'd just found. Get me everything you can on Camille Ross, the message read. Everyone has secrets. Find hers. The weekend passed in a blur of emotion for Camille and Grayson. With Monday's board meeting looming over them, they spent every moment together, talking, planning, and sharing the kind of intimate details of their lives that they'd both kept locked away for years. Camille told Grayson about her childhood, with a single mother who worked 3 jobs but always made time for music, about the scholarship she'd almost received to study piano at Juilliard before her mother's illness changed everything, about the crushing medical debt that had forced her to abandon her dreams and take whatever work she could find. Grayson shared stories of his brother Michael, their childhood adventures, their shared vision for the company, and the guilt that had consumed him after Michael's death. He showed Camille old photographs and the original designs they'd created together, back when Dane Designs was just a small workshop rather than a luxury empire. On Sunday evening, they sat together at the piano in the attic, playing duets as the sun set. Camille couldn't remember ever feeling so content, so complete, but a shadow of worry still hung over them. What if Richard succeeds tomorrow? She asked as Grayson's fingers moved softly over the bass notes. He won't, Grayson replied, with more confidence than he probably felt. I still have allies on the board, and I've called in every favor I can think of. But if he does... Grayson stopped playing and turned to face her. Then I walk away from the company, start something new. What matters now isn't the business, Camille. It's this, us. His certainty both thrilled and frightened her. Everything was moving so fast, changing so completely. Are you sure? She asked softly. A week ago I was just your housekeeper. You were never just anything, Grayson said, taking her hand. From the moment I heard you play that first day, you were the person who made me want to live again instead. So I'm just existing. His words warmed her heart, but a small voice of doubt still whispered in her mind. Could love, real, lasting love, really happen this quickly? Or was this just the intense connection of 2 wounded people finding comfort in each other? Before she could voice these doubts, Grayson's phone rang. His expression darkened as he checked the caller ID. It's Elise, he said. My sister. Camille nodded encouragingly. You should talk to her. Grayson answered the call, his voice guarded. Elise, what can I do for you? Even from where she sat, Camille could hear the woman's agitated voice through the phone. Grayson's face grew increasingly tense as he listened. Richard told you what? He finally interrupted. No, that's not. Elise, you need to hear my side of this. He paused, listening again. Fine, if you want to meet her, come to the house now, see for yourself. After hanging up, Grayson looked troubled. My sister's on her way. Richard has filled her head with all sorts of nonsense about you taking advantage of me, about me having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I should go, Camille suggested, suddenly anxious about meeting Grayson's sister under these circumstances. No, Grayson said firmly. I want Elise to meet you, to see what I see when I look at you. An hour later, Elise Dane Foster arrived at the estate. She was tall and elegant like her brother, with the same piercing grey eyes, but her expression was cold and suspicious as David showed her into the living room where Grayson and Camille waited. So this is her, Elise said without preamble, looking Camille up and down as if assessing a questionable purchase. The housekeeper who's convinced my brother to throw away everything he's worked for. Elise, Grayson warned, that's enough. It's... All right, Camille said, stepping forward with her hand extended. I'm Camille Ross. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Foster, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Elise ignored the outstretched hand. Save the pleasantries. I want to know what your game is. What do you want from my brother? Money, status, a quick marriage, and an even quicker divorce? Elise, Grayson's voice was sharp with anger. You have no right to speak to Camille that way in my house. Someone needs to speak the truth, Gray, Elise shot back, since you've clearly lost all perspective. First you hide away for years, then suddenly you're throwing away the company over some fling with the help. Camille felt each word like a physical blow, but she kept her composure. Mrs. Foster, I understand your concern for your brother, but I assure you I have no ulterior motives. I care deeply for Grayson. Of course you do, Elise said sarcastically. I'm sure it has nothing to do with his money or his name. That's enough, Grayson stepped between them. Camille has never asked me for anything, Elise. Not money, not position, nothing. In fact, she refused a job offer that would have set her up for life. If anyone has been taking advantage in this relationship, it's me. His defense touched Camille deeply, but she could see that Elise remained unconvinced. Richard told me about your little musical sessions, Elise said, her voice dripping with disdain. Using Michael's piano, no less. How could you, Gray? It's like you're desecrating his memory. Pain flashed across Grayson's face, but before he could respond, Camille spoke up. Your brother Michael loved music, didn't he? She asked quietly. The question seemed to catch Elise off guard. Yes, he was very talented, and he shared that love with Grayson, Camille continued. Taught him to play when they were children. What's your point? Elise demanded. My point is that music isn't desecration, it's commemoration. Every time Grayson touches those keys, he's honoring his brother's memory, not disrespecting it. Something in Camille's words seemed to reach Elise. Her harsh expression softened almost imperceptibly. Play something, she said suddenly. If music is so important to both of you, play something for me. Grayson looked at Camille, who nodded. Together they moved to the grand piano in the corner of the living room, not Michael's piano from the attic, but still a beautiful instrument. They sat side by side on the bench, and after a moment of silent communication, began to play a piece they'd been practicing together. Mozart's Sonata for 4 hands in D major. Their fingers moved in perfect synchronization, the melody flowing between them as naturally as breath. As they played, Camille glanced at Elise and saw something unexpected on her face, recognition. Not of the music itself, but of the connection between the players, the way they anticipated each other's movements, the way they created something beautiful together. When they finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Michael would have liked that, Elise finally said, her voice softer than before. He always said you played too technically, Gray, too perfectly, but not anymore. She looked at Camille with new eyes. You've changed him. He's changed himself, Camille corrected gently. I just reminded him that he could. Elise sat down heavily in a nearby armchair. Richard says you're going to ruin the company with your new ideas, that the board will never accept them. The board works for me, not the other way around, Grayson replied. And these aren't just my ideas, Elise. They were Michael's too once. Before we got so caught up in expansion and luxury markets that we forgot why we started the company in the first place. To make beautiful things that last, Elise said softly, quoting what must have been a familiar phrase. That's what Michael always said. That's what I want to get back to, Grayson told her. Not just expensive things for rich people, but well-designed, accessible pieces that anyone can afford and appreciate. Michael was right about that. I was wrong. Elise looked from her brother to Camille and back again. Some of her hostility had faded, but she still seemed uncertain. Richard says she has secrets, she said bluntly, things you don't know about her past. Camille stiffened. What could Richard possibly have found? Her life had been difficult but straightforward. No dark secrets, no scandals. We all have things in our past we'd rather not discuss, Grayson said, his hand finding Camille's and squeezing, reassuringly. But nothing Richard digs up will change how I feel about Camille. Elise stood up, straightening her expensive jacket. I hope you're right, Gray. For your sake. She turned to Camille. If you truly care for my brother, you won't let him throw away everything he's built. No matter what, revelations might come tomorrow. With those ominous words, she left, leaving Camille and Grayson to wonder what Richard might have discovered. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed at odds with the tension Camille felt as she and Grayson prepared for the board meeting. She'd insisted on accompanying him to New York, despite his concerns about what Richard might say or do. Whatever he's found, we'll face it together, she reminded Grayson as their car approached the gleaming high-rise that housed Dane Design's headquarters. Grayson smiled, though strain showed around his eyes. Together, he agreed, taking her hand. The boardroom was imposing, all glass and steel with views of Manhattan spread out below. Around the long table sat 12 people in expensive suits, all watching with curious eyes as Grayson entered with Camille beside him. Richard's smile was cold as he rose to greet them. Grayson, so glad you could join us, and Miss Ross as well. How appropriate. Grayson ignored the barb, guiding Camille to a seat beside him at the head of the table. Let's get started, shall we? I believe Richard has called this meeting to question my fitness to lead this company. Not just your fitness, Gray, Richard said smoothly, but your mental state, your judgment. He gestured to a stack of folders in front of him. I've prepared a detailed presentation on the financial implications of your proposed changes. The projected losses are staggering. For the next hour, Richard methodically laid out his case against Grayson's new vision for the company. The numbers were damning, at least the way Richard presented them. Several board members were nodding in agreement, clearly convinced. When Richard finished, Grayson stood up. Thank you, Richard, for that thorough analysis. Now, if you'll allow me to present an alternative view. He distributed his own folders to the board members. These projections were prepared by an independent consulting firm. They show that while initial profitability would indeed decrease under my plan, long-term growth and market penetration would actually increase substantially within 3 years. One by one, Grayson addressed each of Richard's points, his voice calm and authoritative. This was a side of him Camille had never seen before, the brilliant businessman who had built an empire. She watched with pride as he systematically dismantled Richard's arguments. The board members seemed less certain now, exchanging thoughtful glances. Several asked insightful questions that Grayson answered with confidence. As the discussion continued, Richard's expression grew increasingly sour. When it became clear that he was losing ground, he abruptly changed tactics. This is all very interesting, he interrupted, but it doesn't address the real issue here. Grayson's judgment has been compromised by his personal situation. He turned to look directly at Camille, or should I say by Ms. Ross's influence. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Camille. Ms. Ross is here as my guest, Grayson said firmly. Her presence is not relevant to this discussion. Oh, but it is, Richard insisted, opening another folder. The board should know exactly who has been influencing their CEO's decisions. Camille's stomach tightened with anxiety. What had Richard found? Camille Ross, Richard began, reading from a document. Former piano student at the Manhattan School of Music, dropped out in her second year to care for her ailing mother. After her mother's death, filed for bankruptcy due to medical debts. Worked a series of jobs, waitress, retail clerk, eventually housekeeping. He looked up, his expression triumphant. But here's where it gets interesting. 2 years ago, Ms. Ross was employed by the Peterson family in Greenwich. She was dismissed after Mrs. Peterson accused her of stealing a valuable diamond bracelet. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Camille felt the blood drain from her face. That's not true, she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her shock. I was never accused of theft. The police report says otherwise, Richard countered, sliding a document across the table. No charges were filed, but the suspicion was enough for immediate termination. Grayson picked up the report, his expression unreadable as he scanned it. Camille's heart sank. Would he believe her? Or would doubt creep in, poisoning what they'd built together? Mrs. Peterson was mistaken, Camille explained, forcing herself to stay calm. The bracelet was found a week later in her daughter's room. She'd borrowed it without permission. Convenient story, Richard sneered, but there's no record of that. Because Mrs. Peterson didn't report finding it, Camille said. She was too embarrassed, but she did write me a letter of apology, which is why I was able to get references for other positions afterward. Richard's smirk faltered slightly. He clearly hadn't expected her to have an explanation. I have a copy of that letter at home, Camille continued. But more importantly, you can call Mrs. Peterson and ask her yourself. I'm sure she'd remember the incident. Grayson, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. Even if there were no letter, no explanation, it wouldn't matter. He looked around the table at the board members. We're not here to judge Ms. Ross's past. We're here to decide the future of this company. A company you're willing to risk for a woman. You barely know, Richard shot back. A woman who reminded me of what's truly important, Grayson corrected him. Of what Michael and I wanted this company to be before greed and ambition got in the way. He stood up, his presence commanding the room. I'm not asking you to vote on my personal life. I'm asking you to vote on a business strategy that honors our founding principles while securing our future in a changing market. Several board members nodded in agreement. One elderly man at the far end of the table, who Camille later learned was Michael's godfather and an original investor, actually applauded. Richard, sensing the room slipping away from him, played his final card. There's more in her past. Grayson. Things you don't want aired in this room, things that would destroy your reputation and this company's if they became public. It was a bluff. Camille was certain of it. There was nothing else to find. But the naked threat, the attempt to intimidate her in front of all these people, ignited something in her that had been dormant for too long. She stood up, her eyes fixed on Richard. Mr. Foster, I came from nothing. I lost everything I loved and had to rebuild my life from scratch. There is nothing in my past that I'm ashamed of, nothing I wouldn't willingly share with Grayson or anyone else in this room. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. But I wonder, could you say the same? Are you so desperate to control this company that you'd resort to threats and fabrications? The directness of her question left Richard momentarily speechless. His eyes darted around the table, finding more hostile than sympathetic faces among the board members. I think we've heard enough, said the elderly man at the end of the table. I move that we vote on Grayson's proposal immediately. I second that motion, said a woman to his right. The vote, when it came, was decisive, 9-3 in favor of Grayson's new direction for the company, with Richard and his two closest allies the only dissenters. Thank you for your confidence, Grayson said when the results were announced. And now I have one more item of business. He turned to Richard. As of this moment, you are removed from your position as COO of Dane Designs. Your personal belongings will be packed and sent to your home. Richard's face flushed with anger. You can't do that. I have a contract. A contract that includes a morality clause, Grayson replied calmly. Using company resources to investigate a private citizen, attempting to blackmail me and Ms. Ross. These aren't actions that align with our company values. As Richard stormed out, threatening lawsuits and revenge, Camille watched Grayson transform back into the leader he was always meant to be. Strong, but compassionate, visionary, yet practical. The board members came up one by one to congratulate him, several of them introducing themselves warmly to Camille as well. By the time they left the building, the autumn sun was setting over the city, bathing the skyscrapers in golden light. For you were amazing in there, Camille said as they walked to the car. I've never seen that side of you before. Grayson smiled, taking her hand. I'd forgotten it was there myself. Thank you for reminding me. For the record, Camille said, needing to be completely honest, everything Richard said about the bracelet was technically true. Mrs. Peterson did accuse me and I was let go. The letter came later after her daughter confessed. I know, Grayson said simply. David found the original police report 2 days ago and the letter of apology. Camille stopped walking, surprised. You knew? Before the meeting? Why didn't you say anything? Because it didn't matter, Grayson replied, turning to face her. Because I trust you, Camille, because I love you. The words, spoken so plainly on a busy New York sidewalk, made her heart soar. "I love you too," she said, and it felt like the most natural truth she'd ever spoken. Grayson's smile was brighter than she'd ever seen it. "Then I have one more question for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "Grayson," Camille breathed, her eyes widening. "It's too soon." "Not an engagement ring," he assured her, opening the box to reveal a simple silver key. "This is a key to the estate, to our home, if you want it to be. Move in with me, Camille. Let's see where this journey takes us." Tears filled her eyes as she took the key. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." 6 months later, the attic of the Dane estate had been transformed. No longer dusty and forgotten, it was now a bright, airy music room with windows that let in the spring sunshine. Michael's piano still stood in the center, but it was joined by other instruments, a violin, a cello, even a small harp. Camille sat at the piano, putting the finishing touches on a piece of sheet music. Her mother's melody had finally found its ending, with Grayson's help. They'd worked on it together over the winter months, adding depth and harmony to the simple tune that had first brought them together. "Are you ready?" Grayson asked, entering the room with a small group of children from the local music school, a project he and Camille had started with some of the profits from Dane Design's surprisingly successful new mid-range furniture line. "Almost," Camille replied, making one final notation on the page. "There. Dust and Sunlight is officially complete." One of the children, a shy girl of about 10, approached the piano. "Will you play it for us, Ms. Ross, before we start our lesson?" Camille smiled at Grayson over the child's head. "I think we should play it together, don't you? It's a duet, after all." As Grayson joined her on the bench, their hands finding their places on the keyboard with practiced ease, Camille reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a dusty attic and an out-of-tune piano to this room, filled with light and young musicians eager to learn. The melody began softly, tentatively, just as it had that first day. But now it grew, building into something rich and complex before resolving into a final chord that felt like both an ending and a beginning. When they finished, the children applauded enthusiastically, all except the shy girl who was looking at Camille with wide, serious eyes. "What is it, Emma?" Camille asked gently. "It's like the song was telling a story," the girl said, "about someone who was lost and then found." Grayson's hand found Camille's under the keyboard, their fingers intertwining. "That's exactly right," he told the child, his eyes never leaving Camille's face. "It's a story about finding your way home when you least expect it, about music that was just waiting to be played again. About dust," Camille added softly, "and what's hidden beneath it." As the spring breeze blew through the open windows carrying the scent of new beginnings, Camille and Grayson shared a smile that held all the promise of their future together, a future built on the unexpected harmony they had found in a moment of courage when one woman dared to play an unfinished melody and one man dared to listen in tea. The rooms below, Martha was training new staff for the estate, which now regularly hosted small concerts and music workshops for local children. In New York, Dane Designs was thriving under its new direction, with a waiting list for its beautifully crafted, accessible furniture. And in the attic that had once been filled with dust and ghosts, music had found a permanent home. "Again?" Emma asked, her shyness forgotten in her enthusiasm for the beautiful melody. Camille nodded, her hands finding the opening notes once more. "From the beginning," she agreed, as Grayson's fingers joined hers on the keys, their music filling the room like sunlight after a long, dark winter. This time, when they reached the final chord, it resonated with absolute certainty, no longer unfinished, no longer just a fragment of memory, but a complete and perfect whole. Just like them. The end.